we got three of some of my favorite people in the whole world who are going to come up here, and they're leaders and they have deep roots in this subject area. They all hit it from a slightly different perspective, which I think is valuable. Why don't you guys come on up? As I announced you, we have Washington State Representative Lauren Davis, who's coming on up. Lauren, thanks. Yay. Lauren, I was back in DC last week meeting with the Assistant Secretary of HHS, who oversees SAMHSA, and she said, and I'm not kidding you, say hi to Lauren Davis for me. That's awesome. You're famous. You are famous. All right. We've also got the Director of Department of Community and Human Services for King County, Leo Flor. Leo, come on up. He does a lot of good work. Come on up. Leo and I have this like love-hate thing. We're always battling back and forth, but he has one of the most important jobs in the county, and boy, he has been working hard. Nobody works harder than Leo for sure. All right, and then another great hero of mine, a leader in this area, in this space, is please welcome also Seattle City Council member Sara Nelson. Sara, come on up. There you are, Sara. Come on. Okay, so everybody get comfortable. So you sit there. Well, maybe sit here. I can see you better. I think that's okay. So let's take it casual. I think there's a lot of wisdom here. One of the things that those of us who've been in this space for a long time, we forget how much we've learned. You know what I mean? And it's easy to talk and get past things. And we've got I suspect there's some people here, maybe even online. There's about 300 people online, pretty close to 300 people here, so 600 people that may be wanting to get sober themselves, or parents or family members of somebody who needs to get sober. We've got professionals here, nonprofits, experts, leaders, policymakers, all of it. So, let's get down to some of the background here, and then we'll go into some more specific questions. But all right, Lauren. You're an elected official. I'll hit you first. All right, we'll start over there. So first of all, just to kick off the discussion, so how did you sort of get into at first this sort of space, the substance use and sort of recovery space? What's your story there?
Yeah, thank you. Is this on? Yeah. Okay. First thing I want to say is just thank you, Councilmember, for putting this on, and I really applaud you. I think we all do, for sharing your recovery story and for bringing us all here. It's really, really deeply appreciated. I was born into this space. I have a parent who has very severe alcohol use disorder and has my entire life. That is not actually how I ended up working in this field for a living. It was about 11 years ago, and I was 24 years old, ended up serving in a primary caregiving role for my best friend, who was also 24 years old, and was dying of polysubstance use disorder, alcohol, benzodiazepines, opioids, and was in our emergency departments in this county over 75 times, in the ICU 3 times, and I was at his bedside over and over, begging anyone and everyone to save his life, and nobody could or nobody would. And by the grace of God, he lived, and I quit my whole career in international development and had no credentials to be working in this field at all, but a whole lot of heart, and have been doing this work ever since.
So it's a great story. I know you'll get a chance to tell a little bit more. Leo, Director Flor, tell us a little bit. How did you get into this?
Yeah. So as you said, a very different angle. So, my professional training is actually in the Army. It's a culture that really sort of glorifies substance use. And the idea of recovery never even sort of penetrates your mind when you live in that world. I will say that since coming to King County, I get the privilege of site and shelters, site and permanent supportive housing, helping veterans, working with seniors, youth supportive programming. And no matter what you want to do in our society, if you seek to help connect somebody in the community to stability, to housing, to health. You are going to run up against the fact that there's not enough substance use disorder care, resources, or understanding in our community. And that's really my primary point of connection to this work. If you want to make progress on anything, we got to make progress on this.
Thanks, Leo. Good job. And Councilmember Sara Nelson, so glad to have you here. How did you get into this space?
Well, my name is Sara Nelson, and I've got 2.5 years sober.
Yay!
So
Woo!
I checked myself into inpatient treatment during COVID because I was an extrovert, unsupervised brewery owner and in isolation, and I'd never tried to stop drinking, but I chose to take that step because my dad, who had tried on and off his whole life, finally went into inpatient treatment after spending a night in the East Precinct jail. So I just did that, and so here I am. But you don't have to be in recovery to understand what I deal with on a day-to-day basis as chair of economic development, citywide council member in Seattle. My day job is responding to constituents who are concerned about the impacts of the intersection of public safety crisis and our homelessness crisis, which is, I believe, addiction. And so I believe that to address those two challenges in Seattle, we needed to focus more on treatment. And so that is why I went down this policy direction. And when I got into it, I realized that, oh my gosh, Seattle doesn't really fund rehab as I had experienced it. And so that is why I continue to focus on that policy priority. But my own personal story, I would say, is it informs my work, but it is not why I do my work.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I just appreciate the heartfelt responses are really wonderful, and they connect. Back to you, Representative Davis. I don't want to change the script too much, but I'm sort of going fly because I think it's important. I mean, what do you think, maybe in government or outside of government, is the greatest barrier to solving this huge challenge we're facing? What's the barrier? What's the blockade here that we can't get around?
Yeah, it's a terrific question. I think, and the wonderful Ryan talked about this too, but we think about our historically substance use disorder treatment as treating, and we treat a chronic disease with this sort of acute care model, but we also, historically, government has focused almost the entirety of the funding resources on treatment. That is still true today. Folks are probably aware that the legislatures have been called back for a special session related to drug policy, and everyone wants treatment, all of the money to go to treatment. But what we know is that the substance use disorder continuum of care really has sort of three component parts. There's outreach, which is all of the building bridges of trust and giving people just the tiniest little bit of hope that people need to even seek recovery in the first place, and that sense of self-worth that has to flow from a place of worthlessness and no self-esteem. And none of that is insurance reimbursable because a person hasn't necessarily received a diagnosis yet. And then there's treatment, and then there's recovery support services, which is, of course, the whole constellation of everything that keeps a person in recovery, recovery housing, peer support, employment, education pathways. We'll hear today about recovery high schools, collegiate recovery programs, and that is also not insurance reimbursable. And so we have continued to fund one leg of a three-legged stool and wonder why the stool falls down. And until we start to see, for the state, it's general fund state dollars. We're not going to get any reimbursement on it, but you've got to fund robust outreach and you've got to fund robust recovery support services. And it's not rocket science. We just haven't, honestly, we have not prioritized this.
That's a very good response. Thank you for that. Director Flor, same question. What is the greatest barrier in your mind to a healthy community?
Yeah. So I'll take the same sort of funding perspective as the representative. but look at it on a little bit of a different axis. And so, in government, you generally have like efficiency approaches and sufficiency approaches. Sufficiency, an example is the fire department. Like, you need the fire department to show up in 7 minutes. You care less about whether they're playing ping pong when they're not responding. You want them to be there in 7 minutes, because if they're not, your house burns down or people can lose their lives. Efficiency funding models say, I want to spend as little as possible to get, on average, the minimally acceptable effect. Our healthcare system generally, and certainly it's the case with the behavioral healthcare system, is funded on an efficiency model. And so I think it's similarly completely predictable that when you take a look at community level efficiency and you start to make sure that we are spending only as much as we need as opposed to responding as fast as we can, that the thing that we lose and that we sort of externalize is human lives. And then I think Representative Davis said it really well, hope. When people lose hope, then I think you begin to see what we're seeing in our community. So there's a quote that I can attribute to myself, that we have pursued a managed cost model in behavioral healthcare, not a managed care model in behavioral healthcare. And I don't think it's going to change until we start to make sure that our system is sufficient before we make it efficient.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you. And Councilmember Nelson, what do you think the barriers are, in your opinion?
Well, all of the above, yes. And I also feel like there might be a philosophical component to what we're talking about, because I believe in the general harm reduction principle of meeting people where they're at, but I also believe that we do have to try to change harmful behavior. And to me, that means in the treatment space that we have to compassionately and assertively encourage recovery and provide friction-free access to the broadest possible range of treatment services. And then also, yes, sober housing. And that we do have in Seattle some very limited funding for sober housing, but for the most part, we've got a housing first model. And so I think that when I talk about philosophy, we need to make space for recovery housing as well. And so I think that a lot of the people in the public health profession, you are dealing with people dying and up front. And so how do we stabilize people? How do we reduce the potential for fatal overdoses? And that is very important. Medication for opioid use disorder doesn't treat methamphetamine. And that is the biggest cause right now of overdose fatalities, is a combination of opioids and stimulants. And so I think a barrier is seeking ways of addressing a broader range of treatments, and also just recognizing that recovery is not for everyone, and it's certainly expensive, but it is possible. And so we should make that option a little bit more available to people if that's where people are at.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you all in just a second, what have you seen recently that gives you hope in this area? I want to just take the prerogative of just kind of doubling down on everything that you said. I mean, I grew up on the mean streets of Bellevue, right down the hill here. Okay. Fought my way out. I had every single possible advantage, and I found myself utterly crippled by substance use disorder. It does not matter race, creed, color, religion, sexual orientation, any of it. If addiction gets you, it gets you. And I see communities, BIPOC communities in particular, Native American communities, there's just a locked gate around access to those services. And so, race should never be a barrier to getting the treatment you need. Cost, money should never be a barrier. Man, I'm here to tell you, I saw an estimate that 10% of the U.S. economy is impacted by drug and alcohol addiction, just flat out. There is no dollar amount that is worth more than saving somebody's life and making them a productive member of society for them and their families. Okay, so cost should never be a barrier. And the other one, which we touched on a little bit, stigma. Stigma should never be a barrier, and yet 90% of people won't seek treatment for that reason, right? I will tell you, for me, for years, I had a problem. I knew I had a problem. I would not go into an AA meeting because I was terrified as an elected official of being recognized. I finally took a DUI in the front page of the local section of the Seattle Times before I figured out maybe I should go to those meetings. All right. My grandmother read that story. It was bad news. Stigma, right? All right. So those are some barriers we got to work on. It's easy for me to say in a 10-second soundbite, much harder to put into practice. All right, let's start. We're going to go this way now. Let's talk about, as we go around the country, I think we all sort of done a little bit of this. There are some communities out there that are doing things pretty well, but we're not far behind some of those leading communities. And some would argue we're leading in some areas, but Connecticut seems to be doing some things pretty good. Boston does, some places in Michigan. What in your view do you think we're doing maybe well here in the PNW?
Well, I think what you're doing today is gives me hope, and this is exactly what we need to be doing, is pulling together a diverse community of people that are all touched by substance use disorder and addiction. So I'll give you a couple examples. I don't get out much. I don't travel around the country very much, so my vision is a little bit limited. But I will say that that Mayor Harrell's contingency management pilot program gives me hope, because it rewards sobriety. It provides incentive for people to stay sober for a couple weeks. That can get their mind into a different space to maybe make a decision to go into recovery. That's different. And contingency management is an extremely effective, it's got, SAMHSA, I think, says that it is the most effective strategy when combined with other recovery treatments, like primarily counseling. And so we have to start thinking about incentives as well as, and so that's something that is positive. I also believe that we can look outside this country. I've recently learned that Alberta has opened up 10,000 beds in coordinated in recovery centers that offer the whole range of services from detox all the way through to referrals or placement into sober housing, and they have reduced their overdose rate, fatal overdose rate, by 45%. And so, I'm looking for models that work, and I'm sure they abound, but I leave that to the pros that have really done this research to help inform Seattle policymakers what we should be doing.
Thanks. Next question. Director Flor.
Absolutely. So one wonky thing and then one practical thing. On the wonky side, and it's the leadership of the state legislature and the state in general, after a 7% Medicaid rate increase last year, they've just enacted a 15% Medicaid rate increase this year. So that is substantial progress, strong leadership, and I think the state deserves a lot of credit for what seems super wonky, but will translate into real change. The more practical thing, on April 25th, 56.66% of King County voters approved to tax themselves at $1.25 billion over the next 9 years in the form of the Crisis Care Centers levy to undertake what will be the most dramatic local transformation of access to behavioral health care, including substance use care, in the entire country. That is the kind of optimism, hope, and I think ambition that it's going to take year after year after year to make the type of change we need to make, and I'm really hopeful for that. I appreciate very much the council members' leadership on that as well. It's another one of these issues when confronted with a solution.
Grumpy Republicans can support tax increases from time to time, but Leo's leadership on that was really important. Let's give him a round of applause for that. That's huge. Good, thanks. And that is, when I was back meeting with the Assistant Secretary of HHS, I mentioned that and she lit up. She liked that 5 crisis care center stuff. That's good stuff. Representative Davis, same question to you.
Sure. So I'm going to double down on kind of what I said earlier about that outreach, treatment, and recovery support services. So historically, I'll just speak for the state legislature in the state. We have minus the last couple of years, we had invested almost $0 on the recovery side of the ledger and the outreach side of the ledger. And to speak about the outreach piece specifically, in my decade plus of work in this field, I found that there are 2 reasons and 2 reasons only that people don't seek treatment. Number 1 is they don't have hope that they'll ever recover. And number 2 is they don't believe they're worthy of recovery. And again, how do you bottle that, right? How do you bottle that sense of hope? And the way you bottle it is lived experience of people who have done it. And so hiring people to do outreach work who can actually engender hope in another human being. The statistics are quite compelling. We have local data that suggests strongly that between 80 and up to 95% of people in active addiction are interested in help. And the national data is that the percentage of people who actually receive help is 11%. So if you are interested in doing something about this issue, you might be well suited to try to close that delta between the 11% who are receiving services and the 90% of the willing. And the way you do that is outreach. And the state's response to that more recently has been funding outreach statewide under this umbrella of the Recovery Navigator program. But that was basically, thank you, basically a statewide expansion of the LEAD model, which was born right here, an international evidence-based model of doing that, of hiring people with lived experience, of diverting people from the criminal legal system. But what it is again, meeting people where they are, but not leaving people where they are, and providing that intensive case management. I'll just say, I spent the last 2 days, I do this a lot, but navigating a friend through our treatment system. And despite all of my knowledge or connections, it takes an act of God to get somebody into recovery in the state of Washington. And you need help. You need a guide. And so we finally funded that. We didn't fund it enough, but I'm encouraged. And the data coming out of that program is phenomenal. People are overwhelmingly accepting services and getting better. And nobody who actually knows anything about this work is surprised. We just never funded it before. So I'm encouraged about that.
Great comments. So true. Because we have a variety of audiences, and there's some family members both here and online. We got about as many people online as we do here in the room right now. And I got a call from my brother last month, a good friend of ours who grew up right here in the neighborhood, died of an overdose. And he and I had been talking some about him, a very serious drinking problem, but there was other drugs, I'm sure. And he had talked to me a couple times. I got health problems. The doctor says I got health problems. And I did sort of the, with love and compassion, if you want to quit, man, let's talk about it. I can help you, and I didn't lay down the law. I didn't handle it very well. And then I had a friend that this week started at Little John's down the hill. Great place for lunch, by the way. And he's got cirrhosis now. He's been drinking and drinking. He's got cirrhosis, past the point of no return. His skin was yellow. His eyes are yellow. He's 1 to 2 years or liver transplant. That's it. And that was more of a tougher love conversation. But the question I want to get at is this. Even with all the ability to speak and talk and communicate in my business, I'm at a loss to how do you communicate to somebody you care about to get help? I mean, like, this is just, I just don't know if you're a parent, a brother, sister, coworker, and you've had this experience maybe more than once. And I want to start with you, maybe any pointers. I'm sure there are experts here that could give us, what's the best way to approach a friend or a loved one who's got a problem? Any words, and I'm totally off script here, but I think it will help people. What do you think, Lauren?
Yeah, I'll start by saying I certainly don't have all the answers, and everybody's different. And sometimes it's thinking about who's the right messenger, right? Is it actually, loved ones can help, certainly, but is it possibly somebody who is in recovery, who has shared experience with that individual as the messenger? But I think it's it's loving a person. I'll tell you what it is. It's what I learned in the rooms of AA and NA. It's loving a person exactly as they are in the shape and condition in which they arrived, and providing that unconditional belief that they can recover despite, years of harm that they may have caused to themselves, to their family, to the community, despite relapses, understanding and recognizing that no earthly person is ever going to hate that person more than they hate themselves in that moment. And your capacity to be light and love and unconditional hope for them when they truly do not believe that they are capable of living a life different than the one that they are. And if you can believe that so strongly and never lose it yourself, which is not easy as a loved one, admittedly, and it can be painful, because if you keep hope, it provides opportunity to have your heart broken over and over again. But it's so important, and people will tell you that at the end of the day means absolutely everything, that one human being, one human heart never gave up on them.
All right, that's good stuff. Tough to follow. Leo, what do you got, man? What do you got?
Yeah, so I offer it with humility, and there's a room full of people here who probably all have something better to say than I do, but what I know is that being with somebody says more than anything you could say. And when it feels hard to say something, something I have sometimes accessed is imagining what it will feel like after they have passed away to have not said it. And sometimes that just gives you that little reservoir of courage that you need to connect with someone in the moment.
All right, good. Councilmember, what are your thoughts on the subject?
Well, I'm in a different position because I'm always worried about seeming preachy, like, look what I did. But I think that it starts with listening and just simply being available, and then being really honest about what you've been through. And as leaders, if one has been touched by addiction, be honest about it and convey a message of hope. And I certainly didn't ever think that I'd be sitting here on the stage. I didn't think that I'd be presiding over meetings in City Hall when I was drinking. And so I guess what I'm really trying to get at is approach with humility and also listen. And let me tell you, maybe it's communicated. I put forward a budget proposal last fall to for the city to directly fund recovery services, and it failed. But every time I was talking about it in different meetings leading up to the final vote, I never mentioned that it was personal to me. I figured that my colleagues knew, and I didn't want to take on, I guess I just didn't want to play that card, because I thought that everybody else should basically just pretty much see the logic of what I was trying to do. But I finally decided to say that it was personal to me, and that I didn't think that other people should be given up on by not trying something new. And so, and it did pass unanimously. It had been revised, but my point is that afterwards, people came up to me and said, thank you. And so I applaud you using your platform, and you are a role model to me. And so I'm just doing what I can in the role that I have.
That's wonderful stuff. Wonderful stuff. And just to close this conversation, and one of the things I want to do is develop policy implementation goals here. And I know that the expertise in this room, there are best practices on how to address this with a loved one. And I think we should continue to put those together, push out those best practices so the community has quick access to them, because it's tricky, but it's important. I can't think of a conversation that would be more important in your entire life than maybe somebody engaging on this issue. So you guys are all leaders. Let's give them a round of applause. All right. Thank you very much.